ES Audio.
From the Jermyn Street Theatre in London, this is the Evening Standard Theatre Podcast. I'm Nick Curtis, the Standard's Chief Theatre Critic.
I'm Nancy Dorrant, Culture Editor.
I'm Nick Clark, the Deputy Culture Editor, and this is what we've got coming up on this episode.
We'll be reviewing Retrograde by Ryan Calais Cameron at the Kiln Theatre.
The industry's moving. It's evolving, but it's still fragile. The big daddies believe just a whiff of indecency or controversy could destroy the entire show.
Okay, but what has this got to do with me?
That's directed by Amit Sharma.
From their rehearsal space in Clapham, Tim Minchin and American screenwriter Danny Rubin join us to talk about Groundhog Day.
You actually have to go back to what I saw as the source text, which was the screenplay, not the movie. The movie's sort of no good to me. It's a totally different form. I didn't go back and watch the movie. I just went, Danny, give us the best version of the screenplay that you think is the kind of canon, and we'll work from that. And that freed me from wondering how we were going to get Bill Murray on stage, because the answer was we weren't.
Plus, for our second review, we'll be discussing Dixon and Daughters at the National Theatre's Dorfman.
This is your go-to theatre guide of what to see or not to see in London right now.
Welcome to the Evening Standard Theatre Podcast. Possibly because we managed not to break the phantom chandelier last week at His Majesty's Theatre, we've been allowed back onto another stage. We're back going up in the world.
Yes, we're here on the actual stage of the Jermyn Street Theatre in London's West End, on the set of Jules and Jim, based on the novel by Henri-Pierre Rocher, and you may be aware of the little-known film version by Francois Truffaut. This theatre was converted from what was the staff changing rooms of the Spaghetti House restaurant, and before that, the barrel store of a long-gone pub up above.
This is a really nice, considering what a nice space it is, that seems like a very sort of luxurious changing room for the staff.
Yeah, it must have been a very large spaghetti house, I think. But it was converted in 1994, so it's coming up to its 30th anniversary. It bills itself as the West End Studio Theatre. And also, I should just drop in that I came here with my wife the night she and I got engaged in 1998. Happy memories.
So we're actually recording this quite early this week, so, something really massive might happen in the next couple of days, and we won't talk about it.
Absolutely.
What has so far been going on?
So instead, we're going to talk about the Coronation concert.
Yeah.
While I wasn't massively enthused by the lineup, I have to say, it was on in the background, and I was delighted to see two brilliant actors in Ncuti Gatwa and May Mac performing some Shakespeare. Ncuti Gatwa, who's going to be the new Doctor, so this guy's going to be massive, but he's a brilliant stage actor, and May Mac, who we saw in My Neighbour Totoro, of course, and two brilliant actors. Unfortunately, for me anyway, they chose one of my least favourite scenes in Shakespeare, which was the sort of seduction scene in Romeo and Juliet, where they're talking about Palmer do kiss and lips do touch and preachers and all this stuff, which ever since I first studied it in GCSE has left me totally cold.
Yeah, it's not the sexiest of seduction scenes, is it?
It's terrible. I mean, they're two sort of teenagers wanting to go out, and I know they've got to use the euphemism for it, but even so, it's just in one of the great love stories, it's not a great seduction scene.
It doesn't feel like the most obvious thing for a coronation gig, does it?
Yeah.
I think he did a few plays with kings in.
Yeah.
Well, I think the problem with some of the kings is that either it's sort of quite warlike or it sort of presages some great destruction, so you have to be quite careful about
Well,
what
given how long he waited for it, King Charles could have done To Be or Not To Be.
Well, and talking of great Shakespearean kings, we'll move on. The one that you definitely couldn't have used in this Coronation concert. There's going to be another Macbeth.
Another
Macbeth, yeah.
David Tennant this time.
Yes, who I think, all credit to David Tennant, regularly comes back to the stage in fairly challenging roles. He's doing Macbeth at the Donmar in honour of their 30th anniversary. Max Webster is directing, who is sort of, I think, quite a interesting director. He quite often takes an interesting spin on things, so this is obviously designed to shake it up a bit, and it's going to be quite an intimate evening as well.
Do you know what? That's one of the things about Macbeth that I've always thought. Whenever you see it in a really big space, I slightly lose heart, because to me, there's only one Macbeth I've ever really, really loved, and it was the one I saw in the pit at the Barbican. I don't know how long ago, 20 years ago maybe. And it brought it home to me how much it is a psychological and domestic drama.
Yes.
Like all of the stuff that happens that's epic happens off stage elsewhere, and they just talk about it. When you're really, really close to the action, it's so much more effective. So I'm really excited to see that in the Donmar space.
Right, let's get into our first review.
They want to know that if you should fall, you would bleed blue and not
Red, really?
Senator McCarthy's getting...
I'm just an actor.
Activists.
Retrograde at the Kiln Theatre. I haven't seen it, but you two have. Tell me more.
It's based loosely on a real incident in the life of the pioneering black Hollywood actor Sidney Poitier, when he was asked several times, actually, as part of a movie contract to sign a loyalty oath, which is sort of like an undertaking, essentially to not do or say anything or associate with anyone that might indicate even a slight tenuous link with communism. And we now know that obviously that quite a lot of civil rights leaders and activists were kind of deliberately lumped in with this in a kind of covert attempt to undermine the movement during the 50s and 60s. So that's the rough context. Ryan Calais Cameron has taken this and turned it into a sort of real-time thriller, an encounter with the dark side of Hollywood, embodied by a sort of sleazy lawyer during America's post-war Red Scare. And there are three characters: Poitier, a right-wing lawyer called Parks, and a liberal writer called Bobby. And we bloody loved it.
We bloody loved it. It's really, really, really exciting. It's really thrilling and it's sort of energising. And as you say, it unfolds in real time, which is something you just don't often see. And there is a ticking clock at the back of the set, ticking down the 90 minutes of this incredibly propulsive play. The performances are great. The dialogue is amazing. The dialogue, I think we discussed with Ryan last week, it feels like and sounds like the sort of snappy Hollywood dialogue from the 50s or even the 40s.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of wisecracking and back and forth. It's really fun. And then it kind of in the way that sort of Aaron Sorkin movies that are set in the contemporary era now. It's not real, but it's great.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of consciously not real. This, I think it's quite sort of heightened and quite sort of musical in lots of ways. There are more wisecracks than anybody could have come out with in the space of a single speech.
You need like the Succession writers' room.
Yes, you do. You would need a little sort of ticking over wisecrackometer of the different things. There's lots of little ones. Like I love the lawyer shouting out, "If your phone doesn't ring, it's me." I thought this was tremendous. I didn't actually know about this moment in Poitier's life.
No, I looked it up afterwards. Yeah, I was like sitting on the tube googling away. Fascinating.
He found it in a sort of in an interview. It was only a couple of lines that he ever said, and so he's sort of taken it and really run with it. I don't think there's a huge amount of information about this.
No, given that Poitier only died last year and Harry Belafonte died this year, who is mentioned in the play, it makes you realise how recent that stuff that felt quite ancient still was, really. All that Red Scare, House Un-American Activities Committee stuff going on, the Hollywood 10, the blacklisting and naming of suspected Reds, but also in this case, black men who were suspected of communist sympathies and were therefore sort of fighting on two fronts, I think, weren't they? One of the things that, I don't think it's giving too much away here, to say that one of the things that Poitier is asked to do is to sort of disavow Paul Robeson, who I've always thought of as a sort of figure from the 30s almost, and know the sort of first great wave of patriotic socialism or international socialism, but you realise, he was active up until the 50s when Poitier was just starting out, and Poitier's reach, came up right up until today. It's all still really current, the whole thing, I think.
It is, and I also think, it's not just about him being asked to do this really big thing. It's also just, it's permeated by the way that he's constantly asked to, he's got rid of his strong accent because it made it easier to go into the mainstream. And
he's from the Caribbean originally.
Exactly, and he's always very measured and very classy, and it's a thing that he has to do because he's a black man, and he will be seen as angry or threatening or all of those other things if he doesn't change himself. And so in a more general sense, it's about a black man who is being expected to kind of relinquish some of his blackness in order to move into the mainstream. And you cannot help thinking that there's a reason why this period piece feels so alive.
Absolutely,
it's not just zingy writing and brilliant acting. You think of the response to like young actors like John Boyega playing a stormtrooper. The Red Scare, which is obviously the context, might be gone, but those racial prejudices haven't gone away.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, and I think Bobby is, who's played by Ian Bonar, and I think we'll talk in a minute about the performances, but he's an interesting character. I think he's a little bit thinly drawn, as is Parks. They're both there sort of to propel the story, I think, in a way. But he's important because what he shows you is Bobby is the writer of the movie that Sidney's come in to sign the contract for, and he's very liberal. He's a friend of Sidney's. Their wives hang out, and he's a white man, intellectually understands how wrong racism is, passionately opposed to it, but cannot quite make the leap to zero tolerance, because crucially it doesn't apply to him. And then when it becomes clear that to sort of stand up in a super meaningful way is going to have a detrimental effect, or may have a detrimental effect on his own career, he doesn't quite have the courage or the conviction. And I think that frankly, for most of us, and speaking from a kind of liberal white perspective specifically, it's really uncomfortable to watch.
Yeah, yes, it's true. You're right too that Bobby is a slightly underwritten character. Parks the lawyer is a slightly overwritten one.
Maybe that's the way to look at it. Yeah.
He is sort of, his speeches are entirely sort of composed in aphorisms or threats, really. Yeah. And he's a great sort of demonic figure.
Oh yeah, and I think the actor Daniel Lapine, I think it is
right.
Brilliantly serpentine in that role. He's sort of manipulative and oily and intimidating and horrible. I mean, you really loathe
you
him.
almost feel his eyes swiveling through the course of the whole play. I mean, I think both those actors did very well, but this is really Ivanno Jeremiah's show as Poitier, isn't it? He doesn't look that much like Poitier. He's a very tall, slim man, whereas Poitier seemed more sort of foursquare. And he doesn't, crucially, do an impersonation of Poitier, but he captures some of that diction and also, I thought brilliantly, the sense of someone who has changed their accent.
Yeah.
You hear the hints of Caribbean underneath.
So skillful.
This sort of very clipped RP that he's adopted.
You just can't take your eyes off him, I think.
It's
a stonking performance.
Terrific performance, yeah.
I also think that Ryan Calais Cameron's Poitier is really beautifully rounded as a character. Obviously he hesitates when he's asked to do this thing, and if he does it, then his career seems as though it will take off. You can see he's not doing it through greed or kind of a lack of integrity, but because he understands that change requires sacrifice, and it's not always easy to know what sacrifice to make.
Yes.
You really get that straight away. There's no ambiguity about it. You root for him all the way through.
Again, this isn't too much of a giveaway, but it ends with a speech that Poitier gave, just played over the end of it, which normally I would think would be a dreadful end to a play, but it really, really works.
Yeah.
And it made me go and Google that speech and listen to Poitier do it, and it's incredibly moving.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant.
I think this isn't the perfect play, as we've said. Some of the characters are sort of under or overwritten, but it's relentlessly exciting. It absolutely doesn't matter, and absolutely historically fascinating, but absolutely of its moment as well.
And I think maybe, because it is interestingly more mainstream than For Black Boys, actually, for in fact all of the reasons that we've mentioned before, but also just because it's a much more straight play, it's going to make a star both of its writer and of its lead, I think.
Yeah.
When you finish listening to this episode, you can hear our chat with Ryan Calais Cameron from last week by clicking the link in our show notes.
Right, let's go for a break.
Stay right here, because after the break we'll be joined by Tim Minchin and Danny Rubin to chat about Groundhog Day.
Sorry, what are we going to be chatting about?
Very good, Nancy. Very good.
I'm Lenny Henry, and you're listening to the Evening Standard Theatre Podcast.
I'm here in Clapham, where rehearsals are currently taking place for the return of Groundhog Day, the musical, which is coming to the Old Vic. I'd like to welcome to the pod the show's book writer, Danny Rubin, and Tim Minchin, who has written the music and the lyrics. Welcome.
Yay!
Tim, what's it like to be back in the rehearsal room?
It's very, very exciting. I really like this musical. It's like everything that excites me. It's got sort of infinite scope for ideas, and even though we've done it all before, there's even sort of infinite scope to just make little adjustments musically and stuff to make it pop. And also it's incredibly cool because of the structure of the way the business works. We had this amazing run in London 7 years ago and got covered in flowers and awards, and then we went to Broadway where it didn't run very long, and then a million things have happened since then to stop it coming back into town. So it's definitely a sense of satisfaction. It's a homecoming. For us, it's never ended. It's just been like, when are we going to get this thing back?
Danny, you co-wrote the film, so you've lived with this an awful long time. Where are you with it 30 years on?
Well, the same thing. And first of all, the story just... every time it's like the same river twice. It's a different show because you're different and you pull different things out of it. And that's as true for me as it is for anybody. And then additionally, the film has had some impact on the culture. And now it's a different world just because of the idea of Groundhog Day being part of the language. It's a living, breathing, growing, biological entity, really. And
but is it a squirrel or is it a beaver?
Kind of both, but not quite either.
Ooh, and that's us. Mic drop.
How do you first get involved with the musical? I know there were several iterations, maybe this particular iteration that ended up in the Old Vic in 2017 or 2016.
Well, it was just an intention of mine to turn it into a musical, but not right away because I wanted to do other things. And it just started gaining momentum, and people would call me every few years, people who were in musicals, choreographers and directors and producers and actors, everybody, they'd call me and say, this would be great as a musical. And I'm like, that's great. I'm kind of working on it, and see if they wanted to work with me. And ultimately, I was looking for the right partner.
Am I right in thinking Stephen Sondheim at one stage was talking about this?
Yeah, but he didn't measure up to my
exacting standards.
Yeah, I was looking for somebody who could actually pull it off.
And at last you found Tim. Tim, when did you get involved?
Matthew Warchus, the director who directed Matilda, and we worked together on that for some years. Pretty soon after Matilda opened on the West End, said, I think we should do Groundhog Day. And I sort of went, sure. Which is actually, it's not as simple as it may sound, because although it's a wonderful story, film to stage doesn't feel like something that's particularly intuitive to me. I'm not interested in like, there's a property we can exploit and make some money out of. Either the foundational philosophy or the ideas behind a story are good enough to be a musical, or they're not. And I have quite a strong intuitive reaction to that. I'm sure I'm wrong, but I get asked a lot, would you like to make this into a musical? And my answer is like, yeah, can't see it. Whereas this, I just went, it's a story about how one is to live one's life. So it's got plenty of foundation, you know. And so part of the reason it didn't worry me is, well, part of it is that I find the challenge of putting stories on stage so joyous, not always easy and not without sort of gnashing of teeth. But with Danny, I mean, you take a while to get to know each other, but with Matthew, and I mean, it's always sort of this wrestle. You're trying to wrestle a story into a different form. But actually the way I make all that stress go away is you have to understand early, which I think I understood intuitively, that you can't turn Groundhog Day, the movie, into a stage musical. You can turn Groundhog Day, the screenplay, Groundhog Day, the story, the Danny Rubin story. You can take that and you can use the beats that the movie utilized to make a musical, but you can't make the same thing, nor should you even try. That you can't put Bill Murray on stage, the tone of the humor, even the kind of politics of the time. You actually have to go back to what I saw as the source text, which was the screenplay, not the movie. The movie's sort of no good to me because I'm looking for a totally different or more or something. I'm looking for the things that can sing. And it's a totally different form. I didn't go back and watch the movie. I just went, Danny, give us the best version of the screenplay that you think is the kind of canon, and we'll work from that. And that freed me from wondering how we were going to get Bill Murray on stage, because the answer was we weren't.
I also wasn't trying to redo the movie in any way. For me, what I'd written before it became a movie was already mine, and I already felt strongly about it. And it felt like a kind of classic story that any storyteller, a storybook, a musical, a novel, different people approaching it would be able to tell the same story and bring different things to it. And I saw by changing the medium to a musical, it would bring out different strengths than the movie did without comparing it to the movie.
I suppose you have to lean into the theatrical things that the film can't do. And I just really wondered what you saw those as.
The story leaves little doors open to ideas. The movie, it's actually quite a sort of light rom-com, but the doors that it opens in terms of the big questions, how are we to live? How do you get out of a rut? What do you do? It addresses suicide, and it addresses the nature of love, and it addresses the idea that life is like a day and there's a dawn and a night, and the inevitability of death, and all these doors that light comes through the crack. We kick them down and walk into that room and spend some time in there. That's what a musical allows you to do. And if you get it wrong, it's mawkish and crass and on the nose, because you're like, oh, let's do a song about the nature of life and death. And you do that song and it like ruins it. And it's not up to me to judge whether I got that right or wrong, but it's certainly one's intent is that it illuminates, it doesn't sort of ruin it. I always talk about whether a story has the foundational strength to carry a musical, and this one has it in spades. You can talk about anything because it asks all the big questions. I think what our production has proven is that a lot of people who come to this musical thinking, yeah, I don't know, they come out with their brains blown. Like a lot of huge fans of the movie, including Bill himself, came out going, oh my God.
As you said, in the UK, the audience really embraced it. It won 2 Olivier Awards, nominated for many more. It was also fated in America, but didn't quite find or said he didn't have the run that it had in the UK. I wonder, from here, do you look back at that with a bit of bitterness, or is it just gratefulness that you can go back again and it has another life?
Oh, bitterness, right?
Oh, yeah. I hate everything involved with that.
Well, no, just it was such a shame that it didn't land at
it was
that
hard.
time.
It's hard. It's really hard when your expectations are thwarted in everything in life. It's one of the big things you have to learn to deal with as a grown-up is that shit doesn't work out the way you want it to.
But also, for the most part, we're just happy to be here. It's such an exciting show, and it's so fun to work on, and you want it to be financially successful, and you want it to reach a lot of people because it's such a great show. But personally, I get to hang out with Tim and Matthew and Andy Carl and meet this new cast who have just impressed the heck out of me.
And although when compared to Matilda, it's like it didn't run so long on Broadway, it did run a lot longer on Broadway than the short run in England. It sold a lot of tickets. It got 7 Tony Awards and endless 5-star reviews. It did its job. It landed. It just happened to land in a season that was incredibly overpopulated post Hamilton the year before. All the shows had been pushed back into 2016, wasn't it? And it was just by the time we got there, we were the last show to come in at the end of the season, and it was kind of written in the stars.
Is the ideal to bring it back to Broadway?
Broadway's far from our minds. I would obviously dream that it would end up in the West End. The Old Vic is a subscription house, so there is no extending at the Old Vic. By the time we got to the end of our 12-week run 7 years ago, there were 10,000 people on the waiting list. So it's going to sell out. And then it'd be nice if there's a West End theatre available. But again, you're slightly just throwing yourself to the fates. The good thing is we know Groundhog Day, the musical, will keep running in that beautifully meta-ironic way. It'll come again and again because it's got these big bones and big themes and is complex and funny and joyous. You know, there's been versions all across America and some in Scandinavia, but this version, Matthew's version, this original production, it will live. And it's beautiful to have a show that you wrote 8 years ago, you know, back on its feet. It's the best feeling.
And Dan, has this whet your appetite for other musicals?
Nobody asked. I'm waiting for the phone to ring. I would absolutely love to. I have gotten back into theater and just being involved with writing plays as opposed to Hollywood stuff. And that's because the collaboration of this show was so satisfying. I just wanted to taste it again.
And Tim, how about you? I know you have many things touring, all sorts of things, different shows, but are there ideas, are there things that you're working on at all for musical theatre fans?
No, working with Danny, that was like never again. No, I would love to. And I don't see many stories that scream stage musical to me. And I don't see many stage musicals that I think, oh, I wish I'd written that. You know, like I mostly feel a bit like they're sort of stumbling on a shiny bit of gold in a pile of rubble. I don't know what the next story is. I'm overdue to have a crack at another one. I'm just waiting for the right idea. I quite like to just write one, you know, completely out of whole cloth, but the powers that be tell me that's never works. But, you know, so therefore I might do that.
Fantastic. Well, Tim, Danny, thank you so much for joining us on the Evening Standard Theatre podcast.
Woo! Thank you.
That was Tim Minchin and Danny Rubin speaking to us from their rehearsal space for Groundhog Day.
Coming up after the break, we'll be reviewing Dixon and Daughters at the National Theatre.
In the meantime, why not kindly give us a 5-star rating and hit subscribe?
You know you want to.
Hi, I'm Danny Mays, and you're listening to the Evening Standard Theatre Podcast.
Welcome back. Our second review this week is Dixon and Daughters at the National Theatre's Dorfman.
This one I haven't seen, actually. So, Clarky, why don't you tell us about this one?
So at the start of the play, Mary, played by Brid Brennan, is just been released from prison, returning home to her house. Sort of standard suburban 2 up, 2 down. And her daughters are there to surprise her, but it seems pretty clear early on that she isn't happy with them. She's pretty unhappy in general. And it emerges that essentially she was in prison for lying for something to do with her now dead husband. What this is essentially is a family psychodrama. There are 2 daughters, a stepdaughter and a granddaughter.
Yes.
That's essentially, and it's the dynamics of this family which is overshadowed by men, but there are no men on stage, essentially.
This is about generations of women. It's also about cycles of abuse, I think.
Yes.
The way they go down from generation to generation.
It's a very, as it goes on, it's an increasingly dark, shocking play that can't help but pull you in, really. Right. It's what starts as a family dynamic of quite jokey, quite funny, and the matriarch, the miserable matriarch, soon becomes fairly clear that the father has done something appalling.
Right.
And it's partly about the cycles of abuse, but it's also partly about the people who stand by.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that slowly, well, actually not so slowly, over the course of 90 minutes, they managed to pack in quite a lot, but they really round these characters out and come to some sort of head at the end of, as these plays tend to do. Now,
It's worth saying as well, it's also disturbingly funny. It's written by Deborah Bruce. There's a lot of humour in this, which in plays about abuse is not common and for very good reason, I think. But this somehow manages a fairly delicate, difficult, most of the time, balancing act between being funny, being very dark, being quite melodramatic at times. There are moments of sort of almost farcical over-the-topness in some of the scenes.
And what starts as could be quite stereotypical or certainly archetypal characters at the beginning. All the different women represent certain things.
Yeah.
Actually, often they're subverted. The stepdaughter, for example, comes in. Is a real comic character. I think she comes in a cape. She's sort of barreling around writing her new name. She's changed her name from Tina to Brianna.
That's right.
And she's sort of the butt of some of the jokes. And by the end, she is the character that sort of has the most agency.
She's the trigger for the family secrets coming out, isn't she? She's the one who sort of forces it all out into the open.
Yeah, Alison Fitzjohn plays her and does a really good job of that.
Amazing balancing act. As I say, the balancing act doesn't always work. There are teetering moments where you feel it strays over too much into sort of farce. And
occasionally the lines are a little bit clunky, I thought.
Yeah, they are a bit overwritten. It was written in 2018, this, and so pre-pandemic, but was sadly is no less pertinent these years on from that, because instances of domestic abuse went up during the pandemic.
Does it have trigger warnings at the theatre?
Yeah, it does. I mean, this is a story of shocking abuse, really. So if it's something that you feel nervous about, do please avail yourself on the website or at the theatre.
It's a co-production, isn't it, with Clean Break? Is that right?
Yep. I'm going to use their phrasing here. They are a company that work with women with lived experience of the criminal justice system, as well as professional actors and writers. So Deborah Bruce, the author here, very much developed this play in collaboration. The director, Róisin McBrinn, has come back. She used to jointly run Clean Break and has come back to direct this production.
You can really see that lived experience permeates the play, actually.
And they've had a sort of ongoing relationship with the National, I believe, and certainly they have quite useful dialogues with fairly major theatres in the sort of commercial and subsidised
They were
sector.
part of the Shakespeare trilogy, with which Philida Lloyd did, the all-female Shakespeare trilogy. And
That's right.
That with that sort of fantastic framing of it being done by a group of female prisoners. And so I think that was my first time of encountering their work, and that was absolutely bloody amazing.
So the Henry IV and the
exactly, fantastic.
Harriet Walter and Jada Nuka.
Absolutely,
She was
she was a revelation, wasn't she? Here, I think obviously the early standout is Brid Brennan, who is this ghastly monster of a sort of granny, purse-lipped, ungiving, bitter.
And the only person she mothers is a fellow cellmate who has been homeless, and she brings into her house while the daughters look on appalled that they won't give her any sort of loving or affection at all.
Yes.
And that comes out why that is, or why in her own mind she acts like this, comes out throughout the play.
That's
as well.
right. Yeah.
Liz White, who I always like, she's a brilliant stage presence. She's on TV a lot now. Call the Midwife, Nancy. I know one of your favourites.
Yes, I'm devoted to Call the Midwife.
And Unforgotten. But she's been in the Royal Court and the National a lot. But she plays the sort of brittle but holding it all together Bernie.
Yeah.
Kind of the matriarch while Mary's been away, but also the youngest.
And
she's the one kind of thing.
Yeah. She's the one who's sort of ostensibly escaped.
Yes,
seems to have got out of the cycle of abuse. But she is the one who has a daughter as well. And there is a sort of coda, slightly awkwardly added coda, long speech from the daughter, which basically indicts the patriarchy and tells you how bad things are for her generation as well. So this cycle is not gonna stop. One of the things I liked about this, even though it's sort of slightly mechanically worked out, is that all the characters get their moment in the sun, and they all have a purpose, and they all have a decent speech, and a sort of decently rounded personality by the end of it. They may not start out that way, but by the end of it, you feel you've understood them all a lot better.
And the actors really bring nuance to the characters, which I think do start off, as I say, as a sort of archetype and serve the plot in that respect, but really bring something that's very moving by the end. I mean, there were certainly people around me who were, welling up.
Yeah, and as we said, particularly Alison Fitzjohn, who has to start from this very, very comic beginning, and then has to end up being really a sort of heartbreaking figure on that stage. It's extraordinary.
The other interesting thing is it's sort of horror inflections, I thought.
Yeah.
So it is set in a suburban house, in
Yorkshire, yes.
Seen millions over the country. And it basically is a play about what horrors these very average houses, these bricks and mortar can hide. And what's really interesting is the way that they express that is every now and then the lights will go out and a door will slam open, or there'll be energy, the sort of humming noise of what was a washing machine or whatever, but in this horrific way and everyone in the audience jumps. Yeah. So it goes from a sort of psychodrama to actually this horror.
They are sort of jump scares, a bit like 222, a ghost story, aren't they?
And they feel totally appropriate in this setting. There's a room that one of the characters can't go into, and again, it talks about why that might be, but it's about what these bricks and mortar might hold, the energy, the anxiety that the places.
It quite literally holds the sort of stains of past abuse, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
It sounds like it kind of evokes that sort of constant level of silent stress that is in a house like that. Like when there's somebody who could do something terrible at any moment, everybody is in fight or flight at all times.
Yes, that sort of walking on eggshells sensation.
Yeah.
I have to say the sort of set by Cat Heath here is a sort of both a blessing and a slight challenge. It's a sort of doll's house with the front off, effectively, with a sort of gauze veil over the front of it, suggesting things that are hidden or, partially concealed. This does mean that the director is constantly having to invent reasons to get the characters upstairs and then get them back downstairs. So there's a bit of sort of scrambling at times on this. One of the things I found fascinating about it, again sort of fascinating but challenging, was the character of Lee, who is a former cellmate or former inmate in prison of Mary's, and comes across as a sort of random jester character in this. She's sort of occupying the sidelines as a sort of cuckoo in the nest, as a fake daughter, as I think you said earlier, the only recipient of affection from Mary, but a very strange sort of random element in the play, who's sometimes very funny, sometimes quite affecting and quite upsetting. She's obviously a deeply troubled young woman with some sort of substance issues, that's the implication. But a lot of the time she's just there sort of making random quips from the sidelines.
She's the comic relief for a lot of it.
Yeah.
I thought it was really interesting as well, the character of Julie, played by Andrea Lowe, who is the older daughter but seems quite infantile, and there are reasons that emerge for that. She wears a onesie. She's also locked in a cycle of abuse. She's had to leave her husband. The men loom very large over this play, but there's no male presence on the stage. But their, again, malevolent background, again, is the sort of horror inflected thing of the evil presence in the background.
The demon you never see.
Yes.
I'm just looking down my programme, and I think this is an all-female production team as well. So, as you say, men loom large on stage, but they've had very little until you get down to the digital art design. I think he's the first male name on the in the list. So anyway, yes. Yeah.
So a really fascinating play. 90 minutes. It goes really quickly. It deals with very, very deep themes. I had occasional qualms over some of the writing, but actually you can't get away from it. It's a deeply moving piece.
Yeah. I found it fascinating. It's as I say, it's not perfect. There are definite weird things in it, but that's part of what makes it quite compelling.
Yeah.
So, this has been the Evening Standard Theatre Podcast.
You can find all our reviews and news online at standard.co.uk and all our other episodes wherever you get your podcast. A gentle reminder that you can find Ryan Calais Cameron's interview with us for Retrograde in the show notes.
And of course, if you haven't done so, hit follow or subscribe so you'll always be reminded when a new episode drops in. See you next time.